Stormland takes the concept of a multi-leveled open world extremely literally, yet in doing so makes for a compelling environment. By real-world standards, it's a very alien world. By video game standards, it's extremely familiar and fun. Stormland then uses VR to blend together both the real world and the virtual into something rather unique. This game then is exclusive to the Oculus Rift, and if you take a look at the link in the video description, you'll be able to find it on the Oculus store. Also, this video itself is sponsored by Oculus, but all views here are entirely my own. Now, I'm half tempted to call Stormland an open world shooter platform game hybrid. After all, the game world's islands are literally set upon cloud layers, and as you progress through the game, you move up to the next layer. As you move through the campaign, which is a relatively short 5 hours, you will travel between these layers via, to what all intents and purposes, is a space elevator. And once you've completed the campaign, you'll get to the main part of the game. You see, the campaign is more or less serving as an introduction to Stormland's multi-layered game mechanics. After the campaign then, you get to play the cycling world, and this will offer endless missions and objectives, tasking you to travel from the bottom layer of the world to the top layer. And this world regenerates every few days, which goes a long way towards keeping the game fresh. With that brief overview out of the way, I wanted to point out that rather than doing a review for the game, I want to talk instead about the game in terms of its component parts. Of course, in an age where gaming is an everyday activity for millions of people with thousands upon thousands of games out there, it might sound strange to have a desire to explain how to play a game, and what it might feel like to actually do so. But VR is still pretty new, and developers are constantly exploring new and improved ways to interact with the games. So I feel it's really important to actually have a look at what it's like to interact with these games. Now, Stormland is a fantastic example of this, as essentially it is a reflection of just how far VR games are progressing. The recent Asgard's Wrath has shown that RPGs can work extremely well on VR. Stormland then shows the same for open world shooters. So what is it that makes for a good open world shooter? Well, as to that, I can only talk about what I personally enjoy from this particular genre. For me then, a good open world game features an immersive world, great travelling experiences, good combat, and surprising or innovative ways to interact with all those things. Let's take a look at each of these in turn then. I've already talked briefly about the Stormland world, but let's get into that a little more right now. Players will find themselves in a futuristic world and take on the role of a robot that has lost its memories. Starting out from a base camp situated on a small island, you travel to the next parts of the game world using an elevator with attached rocket engines. Moving through the cloud layers, this will descend onto a new island. The islands themselves are very well realised and also contain both flora and limited fauna such as birds. Although the islands are relatively small, they are also fun to explore. I found myself regularly looking around, taking in the environment and gathering various resources. Although this, far from the aim of the game, it's extremely telling that the layout of the environments also naturally drew me towards doing this, a good trait for an open world game then. The islands themselves also contain structures, and more often than not also contain sheer cliff faces. It's possible to climb all of these in a very physical way. Just reach out your arms, making climbing motions, and up you go. To be honest, initially it does feel a bit embarrassing, but this is VR and most of us have likely got past that years ago. Pretty soon then, it all feels very natural. At the boundaries of each island, you will find what appears to be vast lakes or a body of water. Truth is, these are actually clouds. Walk off the shore and you'll begin skimming across these cloud layers, almost as though you are surfing. More on the travel aspect in just a moment. But it is important to mention here though, that it is an integral part of the world design. The islands can be spaced apart by pretty significant distances, but it's never a need to actually get lost, as the game also features a fully interactive map as well as a compass, both of which you can access from your wrist. And as you travel up to the next layers of the game world, the environments will change and take on different qualities, textures and lighting. All in all, I found the world to be something that drew me in, not in the sense of a vast fantasy or sci-fi world, but rather in the sense of being a cohesive world that I love travelling around. Travelin is all important then. Just as with Asgard's Wrath, Stormland doesn't feature any teleportation. Here you will find only real-time movement. As for me, as someone who often experiences motion sickness in VR, I was a little concerned about this. However, whatever magic the developers have used here works very well, as I never once experienced motion sickness despite moving around at some seriously crazy speeds. Clearly, a lot of thought has been put into how players traverse this game world, and this could be seen in the multiple ways of moving, whether that's simply walking and running, or more interestingly climbing, gliding or cloud surfing. The game introduces each of these elements a piece at a time and explains clearly how to use them. And once I had a strong grasp of movement mechanics, I found that I seamlessly transitioned between running across the ground, climbing a cliff face, launching myself off the top, and gliding down to the cloud layers, and then surfing at crazy speeds through to the next island. It all feels very natural and very fast-paced. It's clear then that the game has been inspired by traditional platform games in this regards, but it never once actually feels like a platform game. Everything feels very free in here. For me, it's easily the best part of the game, and of course travelling around means that you will regularly encounter enemies. The enemies in Stormland come in the form of robots, and combat takes place with guns and grenades, which can be fabricated at a construction table using resources you gather on your journeys. Alternatively, weapons can also be collected from defeated enemies. Now, the methods of travel that I mentioned earlier, specifically the running, climbing and gliding, all can add into the combat experience of Stormland. Climbing cliffs to hide from enemies or jumping off edges to evade them and gliding above their heads and shooting at them are all valid tactics and can make for some very fast-paced action. But if high-speed combat isn't really your thing, you can use a more defensive approach to combat, which is my preferred personal approach. Hiding behind objects, using your shield and running and gunning all work very well. Overall, combat is an important part of Stormland, and it does work well, easily as good as some of the other VR shooters out there. However, that's not to say that it doesn't have problems. Whilst I'd go as far as to say that the open world and traversing of that world are massive strides forward for VR, combat itself struggles to keep up with those innovations, and there's a number of problematic reasons for this. Now, one such example is the guns in their holsters. Occasionally you reach for a gun and you'll end up with nothing. Other times, like on the occasion here, you accidentally drop the gun because you've holstered it whilst moving, and the game decides that the gun wants to be on the floor rather than in the holster. And this can ultimately end up with moments of confusion where you're scrambling and trying to find a gun that's actually got some ammo. On the occasions this does happen then, it can leave you in somewhat dire situations where your health is a lot lower than it would otherwise be due to this, well, basically scrambling around. The AI is pretty good, but has the occasional moments of dumbness, often not noticing your presence until you're often on top of them or otherwise getting stuck behind scenery. For example, look how many times I had to shoot that guy there before he even started to become alert. Meanwhile, his friend approaching the destroyed body hasn't even noticed me and doesn't notice me until a good few shots have hit him. To be fair though, these situations don't detract from the overall combat, as they're few and far between, and for the most part, combat is extremely fun. These few issues aside then, Stormland still offers one of the best VR shooter experiences out there. All these various elements of Stormlands then that I've just described all combine together into some fairly regular as well as some extremely innovative ways to interact with the game world. For me, interaction is perhaps one of the most important parts of the VR experience. It's great to see then that VR games are making a positive stride forwards with all of this. As a game, Stormland offers all the expected trappings of an open world shooter, including missions, explorations, weapon upgrades, as well as a tree of talents or traits. More importantly though, when inside the VR headset, the world, as well as how we interact with it, feels eminently believable. As always, thanks for watching, and I'll catch you guys and girls next time.